Candy with eyes2jesus.blogspot.com, and welcome as we continue on our study through the book of Daniel. So today we are up to Daniel chapter 11. This is a long chapter. This is a very detailed chapter, and this chapter basically is like looking at history. We'll be looking at our history. You can parallel this chapter with our history books. And then it's going to go off into our future of things that haven't happened yet. So we're going to try to power through this and try not to make this too long. But there's so much stuff here that this is going to be an intense study. Now, to help keep me on track and to help kind of keep things moving along, I do have some notes pinned in my Bible here. These are actually some of the study notes that I carry around in my planner, especially on the history. When we're going through the historical stuff, I don't want to get things mixed up. Now, I am not a history buff, and I do not know how to pronounce all these names. I am going to butcher name pronunciations left and right. So just giving you that warning ahead of time. Be ready for it. Hopefully you won't be annoyed by it. And we're going to go through this thing. So we better get started in our intense study. And now, like I said in our study of chapter 10, really, if you read chapters 10, 11, and 12 together, they all three go together like one super long chapter. All right, so we're going to back up for context to chapter 10, verse 19. This is where that spirit being was talking to Daniel, who came to him and was talking to him here in chapter 10. So chapter 10, verse 19, "And he saith, the spirit being, Do not fear, O man greatly desired. Peace to thee, be strong. Yea, be strong. And when he speaketh with me, I have strengthened myself. And I say, Let my Lord speak. For thou hast strengthened me. And he saith, Hast thou known why I have come unto thee? And now I turn back to fight with the head of Persia. Yea, I am going forth, and lo, the head of Javan, that's Greece, hath come. And I declare to thee that which is noted down in the writing of truth, and there is not one strengthening himself with me concerning these, except Michael your head. And I, in the first year," this is now verse 1 of chapter 11, "And I, in the first year of Darius the Mede, my standing is for a strengthener and for a stronghold to him. And now truth I declare to thee, lo, yet 3 kings are standing for Persia, and the 4th doth become far richer than all, and according to his strength by his riches he stirreth up the whole with the kingdom of Javan." So this whole chapter, this is the spirit being telling Daniel these things. Daniel's future, which is now largely our past, and then some not fulfilled yet, still off into our future. All right, so this is the spirit being saying all this. Now, chapter 11 is very similar to like chapters 2 and 7 and 9 in that it's going through the kings of the end times. But unlike chapter 2, for example, or chapter 7 that went through the kingdoms, chapter 11 focuses on specific kings and doesn't really go into the kingdoms very much. So we're looking at certain kings of the kingdoms, but it's not really going into the kingdoms. We're focusing on specific kings. Okay, so now we're going to go through and we're going to parallel the historical. The historical parts that you can match with history books that have already happened are verses 2 through 35. So we're going to go pretty much verse by verse on verses 2 through 35. We're going to read the verse, and then we're going to just take a quick look at the historical fulfillment of that verse. Thank God for history books and the internet, where I just have a table compiled that I keep with me when I study this chapter just to keep things straight. So let's reread verse 2. It says, "And now truth I declare to thee, lo, yet 3 kings are standing for Persia, 3 kings, and the 4th doth become far richer than them all. And according to his strength, by his riches, he stirreth up the whole and the kingdom of Javan." Javan is the ancient name for Greece. So this occurred probably around 530 to 465 BC. So we have, of the four kings, we have Cambyses II, which is Cyrus's son. He was from about 530 to 522 BC. The second one is Smerdis, which is Cambyses' supposed or alleged brother. And that was during 522 BC. The third one is Darius I the Great, from the years 521 to 46 BC. This is a different Darius than Darius the Mede. And then the fourth king was Xerxes, ruling from 486 to 465 BC. He brought the strength of the Persian Empire against Greece, burning Athens to the ground and attempting to push the southern peninsula before suffering the defeat at Salamis. Like I said, I'm going to butcher names. All right, so let's continue on. Let's read verses 3 and 4 together, which says, "And a mighty king hath stood, and he hath ruled a great dominion, and hath done according to his will. And according to his standing is his kingdom broken and divided to the four winds of the heaven, and not to his posterity, no, according to his dominion that he ruled, for his kingdom is plucked up for others apart from these." I think we can now kind of guess who this is talking about, because we've already read about this and previously in our Daniel studies. So this took place about 333 to 323 BC. And so this prophecy now jumps forward to the rise of a great king who will accomplish all within his will. We have moved into the kingdom of Greece. This is a story of Alexander the Great, the young king of Macedon, who conquered all the Persian Empire and marched his armies all the way to the borders of India before turning back. Alexander the Great died in Babylon in the summer of 323 BC, and it was just a month before his 33rd birthday. His death plunged the newly found empire into war as one and then another of these generals attempted to take a portion for himself. The Greek kingdom was then divided into four portions. Thus, where it says, that it was divided towards the four winds with four generals. Those four generals are Cassander, and he ruled over Macedon and Greece. Then we have Lysimachus. He ruled over Thrace and Asia Minor. We have Seleucus. He ruled over Syria and Babylon. And we have Ptolemy, and he ruled over Egypt. These are the four generals. All right, so you notice so far we're not looking at kingdoms here, we're looking at kings. We just looked at four kings pointed out to us during the Medes and Persian Empire, and now we're being pointed out a king during the Grecian Empire, Alexander the Great, and his four generals. So this chapter is about kings, not kingdoms. All right, so let us continue on. Let's move on to verse 5. "And a king of the south, even of his princes, doth become strong, and doth prevail against him, and hath ruled, and great dominion is his dominion." So we're going to read about king of the south and king of the north, and that's going to continue on the south and the north. So I'll be pointing out south and north historically as we go through this. So this takes place about 323 to 283 BC. Ptolemy first Soter, however you pronounce it, was one of Alexander's generals who took control of Egypt. That's the south. One of his own generals was Seleucus, who eventually rose to ascendancy over Mesopotamia and Syria. Now let's read verse 6. "And at the end of years they do join themselves together, and a daughter of the king of the south thus come in unto the king of the north to do upright things. And she doth not retain the power of the arm, and he doth not stand nor his arm, and she is given up, she and those bringing her in, and her child, and he who is strengthening her in these times." This took place in 252 BC. Ptolemy I died in 285 BC, and his son Ptolemy II Philadelphus, that's south, eventually arranged an alliance with the Seleucid king Antiochus II Theos, that's north, in which Antiochus II was to marry. Bernice, the daughter of Ptolemy, he was supposed to marry Bernice, the daughter of Ptolemy II. However, Antiochus II already had a wife named Laodice, and she did not take kindly to being divorced. She conspired to have both Bernice and her infant son assassinated. Antiochus II was subsequently poisoned. Laodice then ruled as regent until her own son Seleucus II Callinicus was old enough to assume the throne of the Seleucid Empire. Moving on to verse 7. And one hath stood up from a branch of her roots in his station, and he cometh in unto the bulwark. Yea, he cometh into a stronghold of the king of the south, and hath wrought against them, and hath done mightily. So this took place in 246 to 241 BC. Ptolemy the third, Euergetes, organized a campaign to avenge the murder of his sister. He captured Antioch and marched all the way to Bactria, and also defended the Seleucid navy, that's north, in the Aegean Sea, recapturing the former conquests of his father in Asia Minor. Moving on to verses 8 and 9, we'll read them together, which says, and also their gods with their princes, with their desirable vessels of gold and silver, into captivity he bringeth into Egypt. And he doth stand more years than the king of the north. And the king of the south hath come into the kingdom, and turned back unto his own land. Though this took place in about 240 BC. So Ptolemy III, that is south, went on to recapture the treasures that had been looted from Egypt in the days of Cambyses. Ptolemy III and Seleucus II, which is north, eventually made a treaty in 240 BC, and Ptolemy III returned home to Egypt, where he was given the title by the Egyptians of Euergetes, however you pronounce that, and that means good worker. And now we move on to verse 10. And his sons stir themselves up, and have gathered a multitude of great forces. And he hath certainly come in, and overflowed, and passed through. And he turneth back, and they stir themselves up into his stronghold. So this was from the years 226 to 223 BC. Seleucus II was succeeded by his son, Seleucus III, who only lived 3 years before being followed by his younger brother, Antiochus III, also known as Antiochus the Great. Antiochus III set out on a battle of conquest, marching to the borders of Egypt, where he was met by Ptolemy IV. Let's read now verses 11 and 12. And the king of the south doth become embittered, and hath gone forth and fought with him, and the king of the north, and hath caused a great multitude to stand, and the multitude hath been given into his hand. And he hath carried away the multitude, his heart is high, and he hath caused myriads to fall, and he doth not become strong. So this took place in 218 BC. Antiochus III was defeated by Ptolemy IV at the Battle of Raphia in 218 BC. Antiochus III had to give up Palestine and Phoenicia to Egypt. Over the next 15 years, Antiochus III was busy fighting elsewhere, and his conquests took him all the way to the Caspian Sea and even to the Indus River. Let's continue on with verse 13. And the king of the north hath turned back, and hath caused a multitude to stand greater than the first, and at the end of the times a second time he doth certainly come in with a great force and with much substance. So this took place around 202 to 201 BC. Antiochus III returned to take up arms once again in Egypt, and in taking Gaza in 201 BC. Moving on to verse 14. And in those times many do stand up against the king of the south, and sons of the destroyers of thy people do lift themselves up to establish the vision, and they have stumbled. So this took place in 201 BC. It says, when a pro-Seleucid party rose up in Jerusalem, but it was put down by the Egyptian general Scopas, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, who pushed up to the area north of Israel, and the area that would be known as Caesarea Philippi. And let's continue on with verse 15. And the king of the north cometh in, and poureth out a mount, and hath captured fenced cities, and the arms of the south do not stand, nor the people of his choice, yea, there is no power to stand. So this took place in 200 BC, and this is as Antiochus III, that's north, counterattacked Scopas, that's south, and Scopas retreated to Sidon and found himself under siege at that city by the Seleucid king, finally losing the city to him. We now move on to verse 16. And he who is coming unto him doth according to his will, and there is none standing before him. And he standeth in the desirable land, and it is wholly in his hand. So this is 198 BC. Antiochus III moves southward into Palestine, taking Jerusalem in 198 BC. Verse 17. And he setteth his face to go in with the strength of his whole kingdom, and the upright ones with him. And he hath wrought, and the daughter of women he giveth to him to corrupt her, and she doth not stand, nor is for him. So this took place in 195 BC. Antiochus III entered into an alliance with the young Ptolemy V, who was still a boy. The alliance was sealed by Ptolemy V marrying Cleopatra, the daughter of Antiochus III. Rather than being an influence on behalf of her father, Cleopatra became an ardent supporter of Egypt, even reigning as regent after the death of her husband in 181 BC. And now we move on to verse 18. And he turneth back his face to the isles, and hath captured many. And a prince hath caused his reproach of himself to cease. Without his reproach he turneth it back to him. So this took place in 192 BC. Antiochus III invaded Thrace, and then he was asked by a league of city-states in central Greece to aid them in their fight against Macedonia and the Peloponnesians. Meanwhile, the Romans threw in their weight against Antiochus III, and he was forced to withdraw from Greece. We move on to verse 19. And he turneth back his face to the strongholds of his land, and hath stumbled and fallen, and is not found. This took place in about 189 to 188 BC. So the Romans under Lucius Cornelius Scipio Asiaticus, the brother of Scipio Africanus, followed Antiochus III into Anatolia and met him in battle. Though the Romans were greatly outnumbered, they won a victory. Antiochus III had to give up all of Anatolia, as well as his son Antiochus IV, who went as a hostage to Rome. Now we move on to verse 20. And stood up on his station hath one, causing an exactor to pass over the honor of the kingdom. And in a few days he is destroyed, and not in anger nor in battle. All right, now I think this is the occurrence in 187 BC, where Antiochus III was killed by a mob when he attempted to rob the temple of Bel and Elymaeus to pay the Roman demands. Seleucus IV Philopator, I'm not sure to pronounce that, succeeded to the throne and sought to take funds from the temple in Jerusalem. And you can actually read about that in the non-canonical historical book of 2 Maccabees, chapter 3, verses 7 through 40. Seleucus IV was poisoned. Okay, now we move into the next section in our chapter where verses 21 through 35 go into talking about the next king as we move along, looking at some notable kings. And we look at Antiochus IV, that's Antiochus Epiphanes. Antiochus Epiphanes, verses 21 through 35, takes a very good close look at him. Why? Because he is a pre-type of Antichrist. Recall, though, Antiochus Epiphanes was in the Grecian kingdom, but he was a pre-type of the Antichrist that rises in the Roman kingdom. So now let's take a look at verse 21, which says, and stood up on his station hath a despicable one, and they have not given him to him the power of the kingdom, and he hath come in quietly, and hath strengthened the kingdom by flatteries. This is quite likely how possibly Antichrist will also be coming on the scene. So this occurred in 175 BC. When Seleucus IV was murdered, his son Demetrius was the next one in line for the throne, but the realm was instead taken by Antiochus IV, the second son of Antiochus III. He took for himself the title of Epiphanes Theos. That means God manifest. And therefore, we can see how he easily became a pre-type of the Antichrist. And we'll see that more as we continue reading more about what he did. All right, so now let's move on to verse 22. And the arms of the flood are overflowed from before him and are broken, and also the leader of the covenant. So this took place in the year 170 BC. Ptolemy VII, Philometor, became of age and attempted to regain the lands of Palestine from the Seleucids, but was eventually defeated and captured by Antiochus IV. All right, verse 23. And after they join themselves unto him, he worketh deceit, and hath increased, and hath been strong by a few of the nation. So this is also 170 BC, where the Egyptians responded by taking, and I want to say Sicon, it's spelled Physcon. All right, by taking Sicon, the brother of Ptolemy VII, and making him the new king of Egypt. Antiochus IV responded by invading Egypt with the stated purpose of placing Ptolemy VII back on the throne. Moving on with verse 24. Peaceably, even into the fertile places of the province he cometh, and he hath done that which his fathers did not, nor his fathers' fathers, prey, P-R-E-Y, and spoil and substance to them he scattereth, and against fenced places he deviseth his devices even for a time. And we are still in the year 170 BC. So this is a summary of the accomplishments of Antiochus Epiphanes, or Antiochus IV. By this time he had gained control of everything from the Mediterranean to India. So we continue on now with verse 25. And he stirreth up his power and his heart against the king of the south with a great force, and the king of the south stirreth himself up to battle with a very great and mighty force, and standeth not, for they devise devices against him. Continuing still, we are still in 170 BC, where Ptolemy VII eventually worked out an agreement with his brother Sicon, in which they would split the kingdom of Egypt into two parts and reign jointly. They, the south, now unified themselves against Antiochus IV, which is north. But he entered Egypt and laid siege to Alexandria. Verse 26. And those eating his portion of food destroy him, and his force overfloweth, and fallen hath many wounded. We're still here in 170 BC, where Ptolemy VII had supposedly been under the protection of Antiochus IV, but now they found themselves at odds. Let's move on with verse 27 to keep going. And both the king's hearts are to do evil, and at one table they speak lies, and it doth not prosper, for yet the end is at a time appointed. All right, so he can't be the Antichrist, and he can't bring in the end, for the end is at a time appointed. We will be getting to that appointed time later in this chapter. But we see here, still in the year 170 BC, negotiations continued, and Ptolemy VII and his brother Sicon seemed to come to an agreement, though the intrigues between them would continue for some time. All right, now let's move on to verse 28. And he turneth back to his land with great substance, and his heart is against the holy covenant, and he hath wrought and turned back to his land. So now we're up to 169 BC. Antiochus IV returned from Egypt with a great plunder. Several years earlier, he had accepted a bribe from a Jewish priest named Jason to remove the current high priest and to put Jason into his place. Jason was eventually removed when another priest, Menelaus, offered a still higher bribe. When the Jewish representatives came before the king with their complaint, Antiochus IV put them to death. Okay, verse 29. At the appointed time he turneth back, and hath come against the south, and it is not as the former and as the latter. So this is 168 BC, where Antiochus IV invaded Egypt, that's the south, again. And this time he is trapping the two Ptolemaic kings in Alexandria. Moving on to verse 30. We are moving right along. And ships of Kittim have come in against him, and he hath been pained, and hath turned back, and hath been insolent towards the holy covenant, and hath wrought and turned back, and he understandeth concerning those forsaking the holy covenant. So this is also 168 BC, where Gaius Popilius Laenas, if that's how you pronounce his name, which he's a representative of Rome, met with Antiochus IV and ordered him out of Egypt on the authority of Rome. Antiochus IV agreed. Continuing to Jerusalem, he found the Jews in revolt, where Jason, acting on the rumor that Antiochus IV had been killed in Egypt, had raised a force to remove Menelaus from the priesthood. Now, we move on to verse 31. And strong ones out of him stand up, and have polluted the sanctuary, the stronghold, and have turned aside the continual sacrifice, and appointed the desolating abomination. This is an abomination of desolation, but not the abomination of desolation. This is a minor pre-type compared to when we get the real thing. So this is still in the year 168 BC, where Antiochus IV desecrated the temple, stopped the regular temple sacrifices, and then he set up a statue of Zeus in the temple, whose features resembled Antiochus Epiphanes, or Antiochus IV. So that is that pre-type form of abomination of desolation, where Antiochus Epiphanes, who called himself resembling a god, puts in a statue of Zeus with his face on it into the Jewish temple. No good. All right, now let's read verse 32. And those acting wickedly against the covenant he defileth by flatteries, and the people knowing their God are strong and have wrought. W-R-O-U-G-H-T. So this is in the year 167 BC. You can read about in 1 Maccabees chapter 1 verses 11 through 15. It tells about how certain of the Jews accepted the changes of Antiochus IV and went so far as to build a gymnasium in Jerusalem and to seek to have their circumcisions somehow reversed. Verse 43 in 1 Maccabees 1, chapter 11, goes on to say, quote, many even from Israel gladly adopted his religion. They sacrificed to idols and profaned the Sabbath, unquote. So then that's the first half, all right, where they got corrupted. But then the people who knew their God, let's see, the second part of verse 32, and the people knowing their God are strong and have wrought. Well, those were the Jews who refused to turn from their observance of the law. And this turned into an open revolt when the Maccabees took up arms against the Seleucids. So now we go on to verse 33. And the teachers of the people give understanding to many, and they have stumbled by sword and by flame, by captivity and by spoil days. So this is we're still here in 167 BC. Since they were fighting in order to retain their Torah observances, the Maccabees initially took a stance of not fighting on the Sabbath day. The Seleucids, of course, took advantage of this by attacking on the Sabbath day and slaughtering many. After this, the priest Mattathias explained to the people that it would be permissible to defend themselves on the Sabbath. Continuing on with verse 34, we see, and in their stumbling they are helped, a little help, and joined to them have been many with flatteries. So we're still here in 167 BC, where the Maccabees were joined by, and I quote from 1 Maccabees chapter 2, verse 42, quote, a company of Hasidians, mighty warriors of Israel, all who offered themselves willingly for the law, unquote. So then, as a result, many who had previously gone along with the changes imposed by Antiochus IV now changed their minds and joined the revolt. All right, now let's get to verse 35, which closes out this section in this chapter. Verse 35 says, "And some of the teachers do stumble for refining by them, and for purifying, and for making white, till the end of the time, for it is yet for a time appointed." So this, we could say, is probably about 166 BC. So the priest Mattathias died shortly thereafter. Eventually the Maccabees managed to retake the temple and to purify it and to restore proper worship. So this event is celebrated today as a Jewish holiday, Hanukkah. So here we see that this chapter, pretty much you can break it down into 3 sections. All right, we did section 1, which showed some of the notable kings of the Medes and Persians, Alexander the Great and generals for the Greek Empire. Then we saw some notable kings, especially Antiochus Epiphanes of the Greek Empire. Antiochus Epiphanes had his whole long section because he's such a pre-type to Antichrist. And now we flow into this final powerful king, Antichrist. And Antichrist is now talked about from verse 36 to verse 45 till the end of this book, until the end of this chapter. We still have one more chapter in the book after this, being Daniel chapter 12. All right, so here's how we know that this is now changing to Antichrist, to the next powerful king, and that it's not continuing talking about Antiochus Epiphanes. Because all of a sudden it starts with, "And the king hath done." The king. We keep reading about, the king of the south, the king of the north, the south, the north. What king? This isn't the king. This is not the king of the south that we've been reading about. This is not the king of the north that we've been reading about. And that's why it just says the king. Now also look at the end of verse 35. It says, "Till the end of the time, for it is yet for an appointed time." We are now transitioning into that appointed time here in chapter 11 with verse 36, where now we're going into Antichrist, the king. Not king of the south, not king of the north, the king. Okay, so verse 36 says, "And the king hath done according to his will, and exalteth himself, and magnifieth himself against every god, and against the God of gods. He speaketh wonderful things, and hath prospered till the indignation hath been completed, for that which is determined hath been done." So you see how Antichrist, you see how Antiochus Epiphanes was a pre-type of Antichrist, because we read about how Antiochus Epiphanes did the same thing. Verse 37, "And the God of his fathers," that's a capital G God, "and the God of his fathers, he does not attend, nor to the desire of women. Yea, to any God, lowercase g, he doth not attend, for against all he magnifieth himself." Now, a lot of people look at this and say, wow, Antichrist is going to be asexual, or Antichrist is going to be a homosexual. It just says that he doesn't have the desire of women. But it's also saying here that he doesn't follow the one true God, nor is he interested in any of these other false gods in the area. So you can't read into it his sexual orientation one way or the other. That's not the topic here. It's talking about how he's not honoring the God of his fathers, nor does he even have desire of women, or to any God he doesn't attend. Why? It says, "For against all he magnifieth himself." So we're Antiochus Epiphanes, the pre-type of Antichrist, created an abomination of desolation by bringing armies into Jerusalem and then putting a statue of Zeus with his face on it into the temple. Antichrist takes it further and puts himself into the temple and calls himself God. Okay, verse 38, "And to the God," this is lowercase g, "and to the God of strongholds," also translated the God of forces, which always makes me think of Star Wars, "and to the God of strongholds, on his station he giveth honor. Yea, to a God whom his fathers knew not he giveth honor, with gold, and with silver, and with precious stone, and with desirable things." So this God that he's giving honor to, this could be a form of a counterfeit Christianity. We have a big counterfeit Christianity religion, which is where Antichrist is going to come from, what I've seen from my studies. That also could be an ecumenical, a created ecumenical God, or it could just be he is just worshiping the dragon, but maybe he doesn't know yet directly that he is the dragon, because we're going to see a very close intertwined relationship that is going to be forming between this king, Antichrist, and the dragon. Okay, now let's move on to verse 39. And he hath dealt in the fortresses of the strongholds with a strange God whom he hath acknowledged. He multiplieth honor, and hath caused them to rule over many, and the ground he apportioneth at a price. It's even possible that the strange God could be an alien God. I mean, with the way we're going right now with, a UFO disclosure supposedly coming out from the U.S. governments, and the head Jesuit astronomer coming out and saying in an interview that it could be very possible that some Catholics may believe that Jesus is actually a star child and that they're preparing to welcome an alien God. Who knows? Maybe this strange God is going to be shown as an alien God. Because where we're coming up to at this point is where we parallel with Revelation chapter 12, where we read about real life Star Wars. Okay, let's continue on with verse 40. And at the time of the end, push himself forward with him, doth a king of the south, so that's Egypt and maybe surrounding area, and storm against him doth a king of the north, that's Syria and maybe surrounding area, with chariot and with horsemen and with many ships. And he hath come into the lands and hath overflowed and passed over. So Antichrist isn't going to have a completely easy time. There will be some uprisings against him that he quashes. All right, continuing on, verse 41, and hath come into the desirable land, well, that's Jerusalem, and many do stumble, and these escape from his hand. Who escapes from his hand? Edom and Moab and the chief of the sons of Ammon. So we are now we're starting to come upon the abomination of desolation, where Mark chapter 13 and Matthew chapter 24 warns that when he comes in with his armies into Jerusalem, it says if you're in Judea, that's Jerusalem, get out of there fast. You won't have much time. Notice the list of the people that escapes his hands is Edom, Moab, and the chief sons of Ammon. So the only Israelites and Jews who are in Judea that are going to escape his hands are the ones who think fast and move fast and go at the first sign. All right, verse 42. And he sendeth forth his hand upon the lands, and the land of Egypt is not for an escape. That was south going against him, not for an escape. Verse 43, and he hath ruled over treasures of gold and of silver, and over all the desirable things of Egypt, and Lubim and Cushim are at his steps. Lubim being the Libyans and Cushim being the Ethiopians. Verse 44, and reports trouble him out of the east and out of the north, and he hath gone forth in great fury to destroy and to devote many to destruction. So he started coming into Jerusalem, started the abomination of desolation, but then gets called elsewhere, but then he sets up his headquarters and completes the abomination of desolation, as we read in verse 45, where it says, and he planteth the tents of his palace between the seas and the holy desirable mountain, and hath come unto his end, and there is no helper to him. Now, like I said, you really need to read chapters 10, 11, and 12 together, and frankly, you should parallel them with Revelation chapter 12. This gives us a very clear timeline, and the timeline here in Daniel chapter 12, as well as the timeline in Revelation chapter 12, points that this is the abomination of desolation that happens in the middle of the tribulation. So this is matching up with Daniel 9:27, where it says, and he hath strengthened a covenant with many 1 week. So we read that that's 7 years. And in the midst of the week, or in the middle of the 7 years, he causes sacrifice and present to cease. And by the wing of abominations he is making desolate, even to the consummation. And that which is determined is poured on the desolate one. All right, we can also see this. I mentioned Revelation 12. Let's turn there really quick. And in Revelation chapter 12, let's read verses 7 through 12, which says, And there came war in the heaven. Michael and his messengers did war against the dragon, and the dragon did war and his messengers, messengers being what a lot of people call angels. Keep in mind Michael here. We read about Michael in chapter 10 of Daniel. Michael reappears right there at the beginning of chapter 12 of Daniel. And here's Michael here. This is, again, Revelation 12 and Daniel 12 will be paralleling each other. Okay, so verse 7, and there came war in the heaven. Michael and his messengers did war against the dragon, and the dragon did war and his messengers, and they, the dragon and his messengers, did not prevail, nor was their place found any more in the heaven. And the great dragon was cast forth, the old serpent, who is called Devil, and the adversary, who is leading astray the whole world. He was cast forth to the earth, and his messengers were cast forth with him. And I heard a great voice in heaven saying, Now did come the salvation and the power and the reign of our God and the authority of his Christ, because cast down was the accuser of our brethren, who is accusing them before our God day and night. And they did overcome him because of the blood of the Lamb and because of the word of their testimony. And they did not love their life unto death. Because of this be glad, ye heavens, and those in them who do tabernacle. Woe to those inhabiting the land and the sea, because the devil did go down unto you, having great wrath, having known that he hath little time. All right, so chapters 12 and 13 are both actually, they go into the same event, but chapter 12 is the dragon's side, and chapter 13 is the beast/Antichrist side. So if we now go to chapter 13, and let's just take a look at verses 1 through 5, which says, And I stood upon the sand of the sea, and I saw out of the sea a beast coming up, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon its horns 10 diadems or crowns, and upon its heads a name of evil speaking. And of course, we encountered this beast in great detail in our previous studies in the book of Daniel. And the beast that I saw was like to a leopard, and its feet as of a bear, and in its mouth as the mouth of a lion. And the dragon did give to it his power and his throne and great authority. Because we just read in chapter 12, the dragon is Satan, the devil, the adversary. And we also read in the scriptures that this fallen world is currently under the demonic kingdom of Satan, the adversary. So the dragon, the adversary, the devil, whose kingdom this world is, he is empowering Antichrist. All right, with great authority. Verse 3, And I saw one of its heads as if it was slain to death. I believe this is the 8th head that is and is not and yet is and is the beast itself, being Antichrist, receiving a deadly head wound. And its deadly stroke was healed, and all the earth did wonder after the beast. See, now wondering after the beast, Antichrist. And they did bow before the dragon, who did give authority to the beast, and they did bow before the beast, saying, Who is like the beast, and who is able to war with it? And there was given to it a mouth speaking great things and evil speakings, and there was given to it authority to make war 42 months. That's the second 3.5 years of the 7-year tribulation of Daniel's week of Daniel chapter 9, verse 27. So this strange god that the Antichrist is honoring may very well be this dragon, who may even be depicted as an alien, because he kind of actually is. He is a being that is not of this earth. All right, and then we can also parallel this really quick with 2 Thessalonians. So let's turn to 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. So the book of 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 is actually talking about the same thing that we will be reading about in Daniel chapter 12, that Daniel chapter 11, the end of Daniel chapter 11 is introducing us to, and that parallels with Revelation chapter 12 and what we just read in chapter 13. So let's read the first 10 verses of 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. And we ask you, brethren, in regard to the presence of our Lord Jesus Christ and of our gathering together unto him. So in other words, in regards to the appearance of Jesus Christ, of our gathering together unto him, that's the rapture. When we gather to Christ is the rapture. Verse 2, that ye be not quickly shaken in mind, nor be troubled, neither through spirit, neither through word, neither through letter, as through us, as that the day of Christ hath arrived. So that the day of Christ is one of the terms the Bible gives for the rapture. That don't think that the rapture happened and you miss it, and don't think it's imminent, because it is not imminent until these signs happen that it's going to tell us. Verse 3, let not anyone deceive you in any manner, because if the falling away, apostasy, may not come first, and after that, and the man of sin be revealed, the son of what? Destruction, who is opposing and is raising himself up above all called God or worship. Sounds like the description we're getting there in the end of chapter 11. So that he in the sanctuary of God, as God hath sat down, showing himself that he is God, the day doth not come. So what day doth not come? The day of Christ doth not come until two things happen first. One, a great apostasy, a great falling away, and two, Antichrist is revealed. It says he's revealed via the abomination of desolation when he sits in the temple of God proclaiming himself as God. That is what he was doing at the last verse in chapter 11. And then when that continues on in chapter 12, that becomes even more abundantly clear. Verse 5, do ye not remember that being yet with you, these things I said to you? And now, what is keeping down, ye have known, for his being revealed in his own time. So what is, as other translations, hindering? What is hindering? What's hindering? What's keeping down is that we are waiting. We can't have the rapture happen until Antichrist is revealed. Verse 7, for the secret of the lawlessness doth already work. We already have antichrists in this world. That's the secret of the lawlessness. Only he who is keeping down now will hinder till he may be taken out of the way. Keep your antecedent straight. He keeps referring to Antichrist here. It doesn't change. It has not changed. We have not been given a new noun for this he to be the antecedent of. This is still the original antecedent to he here, being this Antichrist that we are reading about. So Antichrist is going to be taken out of the way. This is going to happen at the head wound that we just read about in Revelation chapter 13, verses 1 through 5. His head wound. At the same time when his head wound is happening, the devil, the adversary, and his fallen messengers have lost the Star Wars battle between Michael and the good messengers and are being cast to the earth. So then the dragon comes up to Antichrist with his head wound, who's being taken out of the way, and the dragon heals him. And Antichrist becomes, in my opinion, containing attributes and probably even DNA, possibly from the devil himself, to make him into a Nephilim. He becomes a son of perdition. A son of perdition is one who is either possessed by Satan, like Judas Iscariot was, or one who has the DNA of Satan injected into him, creating him as a Nephilim, as a literal son of Satan, son of perdition. Verse 8, and then shall be revealed the lawless one, whom the Lord shall consume with the spirit of his mouth, and shall destroy at the manifestation of his presence. That's when the middle tribulation, 3.5 years into the 7-year tribulation, rapture takes place at the 7th trumpet. That's when he's revealed. And this lines up along with the abomination of desolation that we keep reading about in Daniel, and that Jesus talks about in Matthew 24 and Mark 13. Verse 9. Him whose presence is according to the working of the adversary, and all power and signs and lying wonders, and in all deceitfulness of the unrighteousness in those perishing, because the love of the truth they did not receive for their being saved. Most people in the world are not saved, unfortunately will not get saved, because they love the lie. They have their itching ears, and they love the lie, so they never turn to the truth. They never turn to the truth, open their eyes, and get saved. Jesus Christ died on the cross to pay for our sins. Believe and receive that free gift. Turn to God and live for Him and Him alone, not for any other God, not for fulfilling hedonistic fleshly desires. Live for God. And herein is a good place to stop. I feel like we're stopping in the middle, and we kind of are. the rest of this takes place in chapter 12. So our next study in Daniel, we'll be doing chapter 12, which will also finish the book of Daniel. But for now, have a blessed day.